Well, it's great to welcome you all here. We're at my home. This is where I've lived for the last 3.5 years with Father Antoine, who runs our wonderful Maronite Rite Catholic Church parish here. And I live here also with Father Mike Roach. But what truly is a part of this is what's right here, St. Francis and the Capuchins. Capuchins came here basically around the 1940s and set up a parish here with the Diocese of Pittsburgh. It was kind of called a Capuchin mission. And so I thought it was fitting that we begin this history of Our Lady of Peace with St. Francis here, knowing that it's so beautiful to be able to have this opportunity to walk through history a little bit, knowing that, some of the great Capuchins that have come here before and have served our parish, and now we get to be diocesan priests taking this parish to the next level. And so I just wanted to welcome everybody to Exploring Catholicism today as we explore Conway, Pennsylvania, and a great Irish town. Obviously, everything has to be Irish for it to work out well. But it's interesting, as I was looking through some of the annals of history here about our dear parish at Our Lady of Peace, and looking through some of the great Capuchins. It just says Our Lady of Peace was a Roman Catholic church that was located in Conway, PA, established in 1941 in cooperation with the Capuchin friars. And so it's great to be able to of that, how the Catholics, who are ancestors of St. Francis of Assisi, came to Conway, of all places, and in here established a Catholic church. And I love Father Roy Schuster, who is a Capuchin, who wrote this particular history, and pastor here. He said, "We are a family of families." And I think, obviously back to the great song from the Sister Sledge called "We Are Family," which is the last time the Pirates won a World Series, so it's a good song to have in our minds. But more importantly, we are a family of families. I love that phrase. That's what St. Francis tried to do when he would first, quote unquote, invent doing the nativity set in Italy, which was that simple way to reenact Jesus's birth, and at the same time invite us into the family, the Holy Family. And so that's what the church is. It's also a chance for us to just be invited into the family of families. In other words, into the Holy Family, and bring our family lives into that. And as we're walking here, we can think about the great family here and all the wonderful memories of the different events that have gone on in Stevens Hall and in this beautiful school building that's just to my left, and where we do CCD, where we did faith formation and launched many great apostolates. And hopefully our dear Angie won't get hit by a car as we're crossing, but I do want you to notice this road is named after the Capuchins. It's called the Honorary Capuchin Way. And so I've always been of the thought that the Capuchins should be able to make money on cappuccino. Do you know what I mean? Like every cappuccino comes from the name Capuchin. I think if they were able to do that, they could leverage a lot. But since they took a vow of poverty, I don't really know where that ended up. But more importantly, as we approach the church, Our Lady of Peace, we can see the beauty of this way in which the church was constructed, different points on the roof. And obviously the wonderful peace garden that they have of rocks here. And then may peace prevail on the earth. It's in different languages in front. And then obviously we can see over there the Family Education Center and this beautiful neighborhood in which I get to call home. And so as we walk into our church here, we can see that this building was truly created as a place for our families to come. You have a Family Education Center. Below this church here is a family center as well, where we did a lot of youth work and where a lot of the great community activities happened. And so as we enter into this, go ahead, Angie, I will get the door for you. You can see this is one of our entrances to the church. And before Angie enters, I just wanted to get a sense of the lights of these windows. These are very unique. Most stained glass windows have color. And these are just grazed within the glass. And so I've always felt them to be so precious. And I guess here what you're looking at is Jesus on the one side being cradled by Mary at his birth, and then Jesus being held by Mary after his death. And so a church dedicated to Our Lady of Peace is obviously one in which we think about Mary, who was able to hold Jesus at both of those precious times, and to be able to, as you can see on the left side, rejoice at his birth and be sorrowful and cry at his death. But at both times, it's Our Lady of Peace And so we walk in here today recognizing the great gift of our parish and all those who were here. And so one of the great iconic images of Our Lady of Peace we're going to see right now, but obviously as we walk in, we're just grateful to God for all those who have been able to worship here. And I would just like Angie to kind of end by just seeing the beautiful image of Our Lady and can see there. And so with that, we'll continue our show.
She knows more about the early on part of the church.
It's great to be here, being able to whisper in church and be here with two incredible church ladies. You know what I mean? Like women who recognize what Jesus needed, which was that our hearts are so on fire for our Lord and for trying to bring people to him. So I'm really honored to have you both here with us today. Thank you for being here. Dorothy, why don't you just introduce yourself a little bit?
I'm Dorothy Meador. I have been a member of Our Lady of Peace since it began in 1941. I was 8 years old in 1941. I'm 88 now, so.
We weren't going to ask age, but that's okay. Jane, why don't you introduce yourself?
Okay, I'm Jane Harlan, and I joined the church in 1961. I became a member in 1961. However, we had come to masses before that.
And Jane, sticking with you, can you talk a little about your family background? How many children you have, grandchildren? We'll talk a little about your family so people can get to know a little bit about your family. I feel like one of the things that I've recognized about Our Lady of Peace, and it says it in its yearbook, it's a family of families. Yes. And so to understand your family is understand the bigger picture of Our Lady of Peace.
Well, we had 7 children, and along came 21 grandchildren. And then there were 20 great-grandchildren. And Most of them, they received all their sacraments here at Our Lady of Peace, including marriage.
So what's it like for a mom to see a child married and then your grandchild follows suit in the faith? What's that like for you?
Oh, it's wonderful. It's just,
Today, that's not very common. When you look back at your experience, you felt maybe from your mom, or what you got from like your family, when you look back on the experience of that, what is it that you think that your mom gave you that you were able to pass on to those who you love?
oh boy, my mom was a very special lady. My father was not Catholic. And then when they married, he became Catholic. But my mom was always Catholic. My mom had very little, growing up as a child. Even after getting married, she never had a very good life, but she always kept her religion. She was Catholic through and through, and taught us children to believe in God. And she's pretty much made me who I am today as my mom.
Yeah, you comment that she didn't have an easy life, right?
No.
And we're now filming this in a time when Jesus's life was incredibly challenging and probably the most sacrifice ever in the history of the world. And really, I think sometimes we can think that our faith is like an aspirin. If we believe, then we won't have pain. But really, it's not true. It's because of our faith that we can endure the pain because it gives purpose. Do you think that's what your mom was able to do?
Absolutely, yes. And our faith has brought us through so many things. As a child, through my married life, losing my husband, raising the children, raising the grandchildren, seeing all the things that they're going through today is tough. It's tough.
Dorothy, can you talk a little about your family background and how Our
Sure.
Lady of Peace was a part of that?
Sure. I was born in Ambridge. My parents moved to Conway when I was about 6 years old. And I went to Conway School up to ninth grade, and then went to Freedom High School and graduated from there. And then went into nursing school, graduated from Swickley in 1954. However, my parents were both Catholic. All my grandparents were Catholic. All four grandparents came over from Europe, from Poland and from Germany and Hungary. And they made a good life here. They worked hard. My grandfather was in the coal mines, and my other grandfather was worked on the railroad. And my father was born in Conway, and he died in the same room of the same house that he was born in.
What's the address?
1609 Second Avenue. And but I had a good life. My father worked hard. He was a machinist in Ambridge at H.H. Robertson, and he worked a lot of Sundays. We didn't always get to Mass because we only had one car in those days. We're lucky to have a car. A lot of people didn't even have a car in those days. And so it wasn't until we had our church here in Conway that we were able to get to Mass. And then when the church came to the storeroom down on First Avenue, our home was only a block away, and we could walk to church. So that made it a lot easier. I have a brother. I had a brother. He's since passed away, and two sisters. And we got along very well. We went to church, and my mother insisted upon that, of course. And then after I graduated from nursing school, I started to work at Rochester Hospital. And then my husband and I were married in August of '56. I was told that we were the second ones married in what is now Stevens Hall. And we raised our children. My husband was very staunch Catholic, and he probably pushed them more than I did. And he and I, he had all his sacraments here, and so as I did, and our children had all their sacraments with Our Lady of Peace. 2 of them were married from this church, and my grandchildren. I had the 3 children and 7 grandchildren and 2 great grandchildren. So.
You know, you touch on something earlier on in the history, which is, I think, something that a lot of us relate to, is that our families came from Europe. And I know your granddaughter loves to make those famous Ukrainian eggs that she paints. I still don't know how she does that, but you can see these traditions that were brought over from a quote unquote old country, and obviously it goes full circle today when you see that just the awful devastation going on in our communities in Ukraine for no reason whatsoever, and just that awful violence from Putin. And it's interesting that we're in a church dedicated to Our Lady of Peace. But I mention that because a lot of times our families came over because of the violence or just the lack of an ability to raise a family in a stable environment.
No jobs.
Right, and no jobs. And I guess my question for you guys is that they didn't think their faith was optional, was it? Like they wanted to, like, despite the fact they had no idea how to speak the language, they didn't have a job, they were going to raise a family, but by golly, the Catholic faith, their relationship with Jesus Christ was brought with them. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes. My grandfather came over first from Poland, and he was sponsored by my grandmother's sister, who had come over and had married and was living in Ambridge. But they got him a job in the coal mines, and that's where he worked until all his life. He worked there, and so they tried, and they did the best they could with what they had. So.
Did you find the same thing with your family?
Yes. In fact, my family on Baby Kiefer's side, in fact, Father Jack.
Yes.
Our grandmother, she raised 14 children in a little 3-room house. And through that all, though, once again, she brought the faith with her when they came over. But it's just amazing how the faith, no matter where they were, they wanted that faith brought over.
Can you describe the connection? So I think a lot of us know Father Jack Beatty Kiefer and you. Are you guys related?
We're cousins.
Oh, boy.
We're cousins.
How
yeah.
so?
Through my dad's side. My dad and his dad were brothers. Yes. So.
It's interesting. This very program, what we're calling Exploring Catholicism, as we're exploring our 4 parishes, came when we were having COVID issues and all that stuff, and we couldn't do masses. And it was during Holy Week. It was actually Holy Thursday, a couple of years ago, when I got to interview Father Joe and Father Jack. Yes. And one of the things that I'll always remember is when I asked Father Jack about like some of the highlights of being a priest. And he talked about being able to be the priest that officiated and celebrated his dad's funeral mass, which would be at St. Mary Aleppo. And he started to cry. And you could just feel that there's something special about just having a casual conversation about our faith that can be good for all of us to hear. And that's why I'm so grateful for you two to spend some time this afternoon to talk about the history here at Our Lady of Peace. So talk about its very beginnings. It was 1941, so we're obviously in the thralls of World War II, or we're just getting into it as a country. And this area that we're in called Conway was one of the biggest train changing stations in the world, and perhaps I think even one of the biggest of the United States. And so all of a sudden, a church pops up. Can you talk a little bit about the origins of Our Lady of Peace?
Before 1941, anybody Catholics wanted to go to church either had to go to the Mother House, the St. Joseph's, Sisters of St. Joseph up in Baden, what was known as Montgolfier, or they had to go down to St. Felix in Freedom. It was 5 cents to take the streetcar from Conway to Freedom. And but once you got to Freedom, there was a little bit of a hill there, and people that were either elderly or handicapped had a hard time. People did not have cars, a lot of cars in those days. And so there was a lot of Catholics in Conway, and having the railroad and the mills, J&L, Spangs, H.H. Robertson and the National Electric was good working place for the people and for the men that went to work. And at that time, they were all men. They didn't have any women working there. And they had this community here, and it was a lovely community. It seemed like the men married either their high school sweetheart or the girl next door. And so everybody sort of stayed here and raised their families. And then they got together and decided that they needed a church in Conway. And so a committee decided to go, they contacted for an appointment with the diocese. They went up there. I understood there were a couple meetings before they were finally given permission to have a church. And the first Mass was celebrated on March 30th of 1941 in the storeroom. Once they were permitted to have a church, they didn't know where they were going to have it. And the storeroom was available.
Talk to us about the storeroom. What does that mean? Is this like a place where you'd buy shoes and, and
it
clothing?
Was a gentleman, Mr. Stein.
Who was Jewish, right?
Yes, he was Jewish.
I love this.
And he and his wife were in business. She had a little store on 2nd Avenue that sold mostly women's articles. And then he was in business too. So the storeroom was vacant at that time, although he had rented the upstairs to people. And so he let them rent it. And I still have, in my mind's eye, I can see that place. At first it was a storeroom, what else can I say? And they said at times, when they would flush a commodes upstairs, water would fall and come down the side of the walls. And so they put up drapes on either side of the altar. And my brother was an altar boy later, and he said sometimes when they would go in to serve Mass, his vestments were damp. Oh. And and the women worked so hard once we were given permission to have the church there. They worked so hard. They scrubbed the floors and the walls and did everything they could to make it a place to have God's house, Jesus's house. And an altar was erected. We had a lot of good carpenters and so forth, and an altar was erected. They were able to get some pews from Toner Institute, I understand, in Pittsburgh. And the funeral directors donated chairs, and an organ was brought in, and our organist was Gloria Mecchia. She was a young lady at that time. And but I always thought it was sort of funny. There were no PA systems at that time. And when they would have Mass, especially at Easter or Christmas, people were standing and out the door. And I know they couldn't have heard much of the Mass or heard Father's homily. But they went up to communion when it was time, and I guess they thought that was their obligation was done. It was completed, They couldn't help it. They couldn't get in. And
do you remember the connection between the Capuchins and the church here? So early on, was the committee like, we would like some Capuchins to be here? No, do you know how that happened?
I don't know if they really designated that or if it just came from the diocese that they were given that order, and which we were very glad to have. And Father Herbert Schild was such a nice man. He loved the children. We would have catechism, as it was called then, in the Croatian Hall on 2nd Avenue on Sundays after Mass. And we had lay teachers. Most of them were young women. And he would come, and he just loved the kids. He would circulate among us. And if you ask you a question, if you got the answer right, he'd give you a holy card or a medal or something. And then he also noticed that there was such a multitude of women, I guess you could say, who were so active in the church, wanted to be active in the church, that he decided that they should have a organization of their own. So they began the Christian Mothers. And my mother-in-law, who's now deceased, of course, was the first president.
What was her name?
Grace Meter. And then the following year, or shortly after that, they joined the Confraternity of Christian Mothers, and that's what it's been ever since.
And just pause there. So part of the mission of the Capuchins, which is why it's interesting to hear about the Christian Mothers, is they are the founders of that. So that comes from this Franciscan influence of trying to create parishes which feel like family of families. And obviously, it's impossible to have a family unless you have a mom. And so he realized that. It's an interesting insight that your mom, right?
Mother-in-law
was the first Christian mother, and how important that relationship is. Why do you think that was so important at the beginning, to have a group of mothers that could come together and be together?
I think the women the men worked, as a matter of fact, a lot of them even worked 7 days a week. And they weren't, although they were Catholic and did their thing, they didn't have the influence that the women had. And now, of course, the women raised their children and so forth. And it got to be a thing. I could remember my mother-in-law, Grace Meader, my grandmother, Teresa Malai, and Josephine Mary. They would go house to house among the Catholics and asked if they had any donations. And they would have card parties and give these donations as prizes. And they would get canned stuff, or they would get stuff that they had sewed, made like scarves and so forth for dressers and whatnot. And they would give these as prizes. Then that money would go toward the church,
So it's still part of our life here, passing the basket. And,
Yeah.
Maybe we should bring that tradition back. It was something we did at St. Bernard's with Father Wilt. It was called the Minuteman tradition, where my parents would take all of us around. We'd go knocking on all the doors to ask for the annual donation or for whatever. And it was a really fun way to meet people, more importantly, rather than just fundraise. So our first step here as a church was in a Jewish shopping house, so to speak. What happened after that?
They were going to put Ohio River Boulevard was going to be widened, and they were going to take out a few of the houses along the way. And they had to go, if you're looking north, the right side was the only way they could expand it, because the left side led down into the railroad and there was no place to go. So they took down a few houses, and of course the building that the church was in was going to be one of those. And one of our parishioners, Albert Celio, had been in the Seabees, and when they were looking for a church, he come up with the idea, couldn't we have a temporary church of a Quonset hut, which they had used in the service? And so they got permission to put it up. They had property.
There's a picture of it, by the way.
Yeah, there was property on Second Avenue, on Third Avenue, between 10th Street and Alley, and owned by Mr. Merriman across the street. Paul Merriman lived where the Towers is now. And at first he didn't want to sell it. He did, no way. And then finally he did agree to sell it, and the property that this building, our present church, is on. And it was tennis courts before that across the street. And so then they brought the Quonset hut up here and set it up, and then it became our church for years, until Father Roger was given permission to build the red brick building.
So there's inside the Qantas hut, looks like Father's blessing something. Do you any memories of being inside of that? It looks a little bit like an airplane.
I remember being inside of that, yes.
What did you remember?
What I remember, I was 10, 12 years old, and the nuns, my dad would go up to Monkolitz or to the mother house and bring the nuns down on Sunday, and they would sit in church with us. And I had to say the rosary during Mass, which was, I understand now, was not the best thing to have done. But I said the rosary during Mass, and all the children were in the front if you're looking toward the altar, were on the left-hand side. And they would sit there, and I would say the rosary during Mass. And I did that for 2 years. And then I finally decided I was old enough not to.
Well, I just want to comment on that just as a liturgical pause. So before the Vatican Council, the liturgy was basically the priest offering the holy sacrifice on behalf of the people, everybody facing east, which would be the direction that Jesus would come from for the salvation of the world. So it was like everybody was facing east. It's called in Latin ad orientem. But for the most part, the participation of the people was whatever they could do, whether it just be praying the rosary, sitting in silence, or as you said, standing outside of the door. The focus of the Mass is Jesus Christ offering himself on behalf of everybody to bring us closer to the Father in heaven. And so the Eucharist obviously is that presence of Jesus doing that, right? So the number one thing is not necessarily what the people are saying or doing. The number one thing is what Jesus does. He's the center of our church, right? But when the Vatican Council started to see that Mass was getting to a point where we wanted more people to participate, the worship became more communal in nature. And that's what the Franciscans and a lot of the priests started to do, which was to introduce people to the parts of the Mass in a way that you would participate. And so nobody should feel shame or like, oh, I was praying the rosary during the Mass. This is what the church was encouraging. Everybody could do what they could do in order to unite your hearts, minds, and souls to Jesus. And so through Mary, through all these different ways. But we felt like as a church in the 1960s that some of those liturgical adjustments needed to happen so that we could be more in communion with each other as the priest is celebrating the holy sacrifice of the Mass, which is why it's so important to be able to know where these sacred places were in Conway. And so when the Qantas hut was there, what was the next phase of history after the Qantas hut?
Getting back to saying the rosary, this is kind of funny. My husband was 7 years older than me. And so when I was 10, 12, of course, he was just under 20, about 18, 19. And he said he would go to Mass, and he said he thought that was so disturbing. He just did not like me saying that rosary, never knowing that how many years later we would end up getting married, you know. But I'm sure that's not why he married me, but anyway. Then after Quonset hut, when the Quonset hut came, some people never heard of a Quonset hut, and they thought it was really an odd-looking building, you know, and this semicircle looking at it from the front. And then when Father Roger was given permission to build the red brick building, they did so, and we thought that was just great to have a church. We thought that was going to be our church, final church, but it was still considered a mission or temporary church at that time. And it wasn't until 62 when they started constructing our present church that they did away with that mission church, and we became established church, I guess you would say. And it was so nice to have our church, and it's a beautiful church. Mm-hmm. And I have been a member of every one of them, from the storeroom to the Quonset to the red brick building to this one. And I am so upset of us having to have it closed. So, but oh well, that's life.
Well, let's talk about that. It's important that we reflect on that, because when we look at what it's like to grieve a loss of a loved one, as you guys have lost your loved ones, sometimes there's no magic word that can bring anything back. But what it is important is that for us to unite our suffering to the suffering of Jesus, and to see what purpose is God giving me to be able to be here at this historic moment. In other words, how is the Lord present to my grief as I look back at our history here, but also know that Jesus isn't going to abandon us in this, right? So I don't know, Jane, what are your thoughts as you reflect on your past here, and knowing that with the upcoming merger, it's going to mean that Jesus is asking us to go to a different place to receive him?
When I think most of us, when we first heard about it, we were like taken back, you know, and I had my moments where I felt perhaps a little bit angry. Mm-hmm. But then as time went on, talking to other parishioners, friends of mine, being a member of the Christian Mothers, knowing that we would be merging also as Christian Mothers, it became a little bit easier. The holidays were tough. Last Christmas in this parish, in our church, here I go, Palm Sunday.
Can you hold that a little closer to you?
Palm Sunday, I was sitting, always we sat in the first two pews, mm-hmm. ever since we became members, and knowing that was my last Palm Sunday here.
What was that like for you?
Hard.
Yeah.
Teared up a little bit. Some of my family were with me, which was good. Easter will be tough. Easter will be tough. But I also know the good Lord wants us. He's our main guy here, and I'll keep my faith. I will go along with the other churches, and I'm okay with it now.
Talk about some of your memories here, whether it be Christmas,
my.
Easter, your own sacraments. If these books could talk to you and bring back a memory, what type of a memory does it bring to you?
I guess that having the babies baptized is always a big, big thing, and hoping they'd go on to be members, which they did. Seeing all 7 of them married here in this church, and then having the grandchildren become mothers and dads. And what would happen here we'd come to Mass, and we love our new babies, and there'd be a new baby, and the baby would start with the mama, next thing you know, all the way down. And different ladies would say, we never know which one's the mother, because we would always pass the babies back and forth. So, but it's been a great experience. It was wonderful being part of the Christian Mothers.
Can you talk about some of the Christian mothers? Who were some of your friends, and what are some of the people who you got to associate with? And what were some of the activities you're proudest of?
Oh my gosh, there's so many of them. Dorothy for one here. But Peg Sevens, who was the coordinator for the religious CCD. I worked in the office with her some. She's a wonderful lady. Other Chris Musey, Betty McCoy. Oh, we could name Eileen Groves.
They all passed away.
And they've all, except for Eileen.
Yeah.
And most of them have passed, the ones that were my buddies, But I've gotten other friends now. And another thing, I was also a Eucharistic minister for a while, and that was a very great experience. I was one of the first ladies, and it was tough. So, not everybody welcomed the ladies on the altar at first, correct, Dorothy?
Yes.
We had some, But all in all, it's been wonderful, and I'll miss it.
Yes.
I will miss it. So.
And, yesterday I had to go do some tests over in West Mifflin, which is in the middle of nowhere. Sorry, those from West Mifflin, but
My daughter lives
Oh, your daughter lives there. I'm sorry. Okay. Well, West Mifflin's a wonderful place. It's just it's pretty far from Conway. That's funny. Your daughter lives there. Okay. Hello, West Mifflin. But I took advantage of that to drive by the place where I was baptized, which was called St. Philomena's, which is in Squirrel Hill. It's kind of across the river from West Mifflin, and it's now a Jewish community center. And I feel like what many of us feel like, it's like that's where I was baptized.
Yes.
My dad went to grade school there. A lot of my family went to school at St. Phil's. I even named my kitty cat after the church that I was there. And so there is an absolute grieving and sorrow that you both are perfectly like talking about now, and you can see it in your eyes, and it's okay.
Yeah.
Like, I can't imagine when people saw Jesus suffering, our faith is like, it's part of it. There is the suffering in it. We don't believe in some type of nirvana where God doesn't want to suffer with us, but the suffering actually can lead our hearts to be tender. I think about cooking. Like, if you want a good steak, if it's tenderized, like in, I don't know, whatever you want to use to tenderize it. I like using red wine. And then after a while, it gets tender, and then it can cook better. And in some sense, through the salvific suffering, in other words, through our pain, when we united to Jesus, it becomes suffering. And so it's definitely an invitation for all of us to be able to recognize that. Dorothy, how about you? What are some of the memories that you have here? What are some of the groups that you're a part of, some of the people that you remember, or some of the activities that you're proudest of?
Of course, I've been a Christian mother since 1957, and I certainly enjoyed that. And Another thing, I was a member of the Resurrection Choir for 25 years, and we stopped whenever the pandemic came about and hasn't reorganized yet. But we had had so many compliments from people whose member of their family had passed away, and they said that it was so comforting to have us to sing for their loved one's funeral. And I really loved that. The people that were in the choir were family, and we were very close. We started with 11 members when Marie Yater was our choir director, and we went to 21 at one time. And then most of us, of course, being retired, they were older, and they would either have moved, gone to nursing homes or whatever. Or some said they couldn't sing anymore; their voices were too old.
That was me.
And, Jane was a member of the choir, and so I really enjoyed that most of all, and belonged to the fish fry committee. My husband and I were on that. I was a member of that for 19 years until, again, we stopped with the pandemic. And trying to think what else. I do a memorial service for Christian mothers when we have a member pass away. The next meeting, I will light a candle, and it will burn during our whole meeting in their memory. And I will say something about them. I've been here so long, I know all especially the older people. And if I don't, I can get a little help from the obituaries. And I will say something about them. And then we say, Hail Mary, our Father, for the repose of their soul. And that's done at the meeting after they have passed away.
Yeah, and as you reflect on these different groups in your memories, we just think of all those people that helped make this parish community what it is, way back to 1941 until today. And the parish community continues, although the worship site will be different, but the people who are part of this, I think of one of the committees that I was struck by because they literally were in the basement of my house, the Apostolate Committee. Jackie and the whole crew, they were planning all these amazing trips. They've since morphed into becoming the Fellowship Committee because they want to create this bond between not just Our Lady of Peace, but St. John the Baptist, Good Samaritan, and Saints John and Paul. And so they're able to harness all the incredible history and memories in the spirit that's caught here at Our Lady of Peace in Conway to the great grouping. And it's so exciting to see that as part of the thing that I've experienced here in Conway is that when somebody has a tragedy, whether a family loses a house to a fire or somebody loses a loved one, that how the community rallies. And so much so in a couple of weeks, they're going to be rallying around a community member that lost their house in a fire. And so the beautiful, events that the Apostolate Committees have done has been wonderful. Let's talk about the church itself. If we get a chance, maybe they'll show the window again. But that iconic window, do you know the history of this? How did this come about? Does any stories behind this?
I've heard this, and I don't know for sure, that one of our parishioners, Kathy Ross, her profession was to do stained windows, and she did this. And of course, we have the St. Francis Basilica in Rome on the one side, and of course that is in tribute to the Capuchins. And then on the other side was the war-torn city there, because we were established in 1941 when the Second World War came about. Getting back to the name of Our Lady of Peace, when it was established, they had a bunch of saints' names, and couldn't come up with a name. And it wasn't until, of course, the war was declared in December of 1941. Somehow somebody came up with Our Lady of Peace, and it really hit the target. Everybody loved the name of Our Lady of Peace.
Yeah, and if you look in the window there, if you zoom in right below her feet, that's actually a picture of St. Francis's Church in Assisi, which is in Italy, which is so powerful. And obviously the Capuchin's roots are Franciscan. And then, as you're saying, on the left and the right are those worn-torn communities. Yes. But as you pan back, you obviously see the presence of Mary. This also comes from the book of Revelation, where she's kind of blocking the sun and standing in the stars, so to speak, because of the great gift she was blessed with, which was to be conceived immaculately and then to be the mother of God. And so she brings peace to the world because the Father brought her Jesus. And so there are two major images that we have of Our Lady of Peace. Obviously, in this church, that's a major iconic one. If our nifty-difty cameraman turns to his left and looks up to a window that is right near the actual altar, and up to the right of it there, you'll see an image of Mary holding baby Jesus. That's another image of Our Lady of Peace. And it's interesting because it was a man in Europe who was going through a rough time, was given this special type of image, and then he would end up getting married, and it's just this crazy story. And finally, his grandson would have this miraculous image of Mary holding baby Jesus, and that guy ended up becoming a Capuchin priest. And so one of the original images of Our Lady of Peace is an experience of a Capuchin in Europe because his grandfather gave him this at a tough time. And it's kind of this miraculous image of Mary holding baby Jesus, which is obviously the Prince of Peace. And I thought it was kind of interesting how the Capuchins, harnessing that part of their history, were able to bring that into the very name of our building. And one of the things that I love about Our Lady of Peace is celebrating Christmas here. And just the way in which the decor and the music and the joy, and you can see, well, you know, as 1941 December was when the war started, well, Christmas would have been celebrated in 1941, and how we needed Our Lady of Peace, and so important to be able to guard those traditions for us, right? So as you guys look back at some of the history in this church, what are some of the other things that you all enjoy? I mean, I just chose two images here. As you look around here, you know, there's the Holy Family back there. There's the image of Jesus behind us. What are some of the images as you sit in the pews that you always remember?
I can remember when they had the statues in the church per se, and they took those out. But that it was always nice. They had one of the Blessed Mother, and when women were married, they would after the ceremony they would take their little bouquet of flowers over to the Blessed Mother and say a few prayers in front of the Blessed Mother.
Yes.
Do you have anything else to say?
I think when the new crucifix of Christ, the new crucifix of Christ was put up there, my first impression, I mean, it's beautiful, but I still was surprised that it was the not resurrection of Christ. You know, but it is very beautiful. But it was to me, it was a little bit surprising at first. But that's the first I've ever been to a church that had moved. So, but it is very beautiful. So.
Right, and then also one of the things that's obvious is you have a little bit of scenes from St. Francis's life, and or St. Anthony of Padua. There's actually a name possible for our new parish. We'll have to see what that is, but it's interesting that the Franciscan background is still continued, and actually next Tuesday we're going to be continuing the 90th anniversary of the St. Anthony of Padua novena. And so, you know, like part of the tradition of the Franciscan way is one of the windows has the arms crossing, which is that fellowship. It also shows those particular hands are Jesus's. So on one hand, it's like the human nature and the divine nature of God coming together in Jesus Christ, which St. Francis absolutely adored and loved, because that was the key to his whole life, of like his poverty was a way in which Jesus wanted to experience our humanity. And so it's as if God's attracted to poverty, because that's how his divinity decided to come into our humanity. And St. Francis felt that particular aspect of the gospel is what he wanted to underline it in bold. Mm-hmm. So that was a really beautiful way of doing that. I'm curious to know some of the names of the priests that you all remember. Being today Holy Thursday, what are some of the priests that you recall, or maybe some priests who married you or had influence in Our Lady of Peace? Could you talk a little about some of the priests?
Sure. Father Herbert was the first. Schild was the first one here, and he was a very loving priest, but he wasn't here that long. And then we got Father Guy Golden, very good-looking man. All the ladies were in love with Father Guy, and he was very personable. And then Father Alphonse, he was sort of a big guy, and I didn't have too much association with him for some reason, and then, let's see, Father Roger, he was here when the Quonset hut was there and was responsible for the red brick building. And He left here August 1st of 1956, and my husband and I were to be married August 25th, and we had had no instruction. My husband worked shifts on the railroad, and I worked shifts at the hospital. So Father Rogers says, I'll leave it up to the next priest. So August 1st, Father Luke Stevens came, and he gave us our instruction when we were able to get together with him. The funny thing had happened when, for some reason, my husband saw a paper on his desk, and here they had my sister's name down as my husband marrying my sister. Fortunately, before the banns were published, we had that corrected. And Luke didn't know any of us at that time, but he was here for a long time.
He was great.
And he was, I guess he was sent here to build the present church, because he had built a church in St. Mary's in Harmony.
Do you remember Father Luke?
Oh, yes.
What memories do you have, Jane?
Father Luke really is the first one that talked me into becoming a Christian mother. We were together one time, and he came over to me, and I said, he asked me why I did not join, and I said, very hard, we only had one car. My husband worked shifts. I had 7 kids. But he said, well, what if we would get you a babysitter? Do you think you could join the Christian Mothers? But eventually, through help with some of my friends, they ended up watching the kiddos, and I was able to join. So, but he was a wonderful guy, Father Luke.
And all of these priests were Capuchins, right?
Yes.
And so Father Luke, and then do you remember who was after that?
Father Bob, was Father Bob next?
No.
I think was Father Bob next? I think he was.
Okay.
Father Bob was not a Capuchin.
Okay, so was he
Father
one of the
Bob Jay.
first non-Capuchin priests?
Yes.
Okay.
And that was strange to us.
Yeah, what happened?
Yes.
How did that feel? What happened there? Do you know?
I don't know. I always felt the Capuchins were such a loving order. And not that Father Bob wasn't or anything, but it was just a little bit different, I think. And then from Father Bob, we went on to Father Jack next? I don't know. Father Jack Fitzgerald.
We had Father Bruno, Father Francis.
Oh, yes, that was.
And weren't they before?
They were
Bob?
Capuchins. They were before
Yes,
Father
yes.
Bob, yeah. Father Francis Rossetti
Bruno,
and Father
Francis.
Bruno. And that was the first time they had 2 priests at the same time after Father Luke left. And they were.
So tell me this, if you had to describe the difference between what your experience was with a Capuchin priest preaching or a Capuchin walking around and interacting as opposed to one of us diocesan priests, what's the difference between a Capuchin priest and a diocesan priest?
I don't really know.
No, I think because we were so familiar with the Capuchins
Yeah.
that it was kind of hard for us to. However, I was at St. Mary's in Glenfield Church, where they were not Capuchins, so I was familiar with both. But we became close to the Capuchins because some of my older kids got involved with some of the younger priests, like Father Bruno and different ones. And they would come to the house. I got to know them more, But and then we cleaned the church when Father Francis was down here. So I got to know him only because he would come to my house for dinner every once in a while, spaghetti. Yes, so that's how I got closer to them, not saying that they were any better or, So, but that's how it came about for me.
The priests in the beginning had to go to Freedom of Rochester to stay, but eventually bought a house down here, corner of 2nd Avenue and 10th Street. And it was a house at first, and then later they built what is now the parish house. And but Father Francis was there. My daughter played the organ for 2 years before she went away to school. She played 8 o'clock mass in the morning, and she had to go get the key during the week to practice. And she said she always thought Father Francis was a little upset that she came and bothered him on a Saturday morning. But anyway, she used to bring our dog. We had a cockapoo, bring him up, and he sat beside the organ while she practiced.
And so, obviously, one of the main differences between traditionally a religious priest and a diocesan priest is that a diocesan priest has immediate obedience to the local bishop, okay? And so usually they are ordained in a diocese and then sent to a specific parish within a diocese. That's typically the way a diocesan priest works. Diocesan priests do not take the vow of poverty. They take different promises that would be similar, but not the same. Whereas the religious priests, they would take a vow of poverty, chastity, and obedience. And their obedience, obviously they have to obey the local bishop, but more goes towards their order. So, St. Francis in his day would have been the superior of the Franciscans, and then whoever were the major superiors at those times. And so these priests the Capuchins would have to have permission from their local Franciscan order in order to then become work in a diocesan setting, whereas the bishop has full control over his diocesan priest to switch them around, right? And the reason why I mention that is because our church is so gifted. Like, we have a pope now who is a Jesuit, so he's a religious, Pope Francis, right? Our Bishop Zubik, he's a diocesan priest. So in our church today, there's all kinds of different interactions between religious and diocesan priests, right? And obviously before me, we had a couple Capuchin priests who then, or at least one Capuchin priest who then was the pastor before me. And now that's how the Lord has asked us to then move to this merger. So it's just interesting to see the way in which different priests come to our communities. Well, some are religious and some are diocesan. One of my favorite Capuchins, obviously, Father Scott Seathaler.
Oh my gosh.
He just does so many great parish missions, and just for all of us priests, we look up to him as one of those iconic type of figures for us. And what a great gift that is. And I think when you think about Capuchin spirituality, it's like a clumsy holiness. In other words, they're very earthy people. They're not somebody that's very pretentious or try to like it.
Well,
But
he was here for a while.
yeah,
Yes.
He was there not long, though, just a very short while.
Yeah.
But he was here.
With I forgot Father DePaul too was here.
Yes. And now he's over at where's he at now?
I don't know.
St. Felix.
Not DePaul. That's Father Paul.
Father Paul. Father
yeah.
DePaul. Yes.
Yeah, I'm talking about that.
These Pauls.
Yeah.
So before we finish, we have about 2 minutes left here. What are some final thoughts that you think as you look back and preparing for this the program that we're here now, or just thinking about Our Lady of Peace? What are some final thoughts that kind of come to your mind or heart that you would want to share with those who are also trying to cherish, grieve, and also relish our great history here? As I sit here, and just cut me off when you're ready, I just think about, I've only been here for 3.5 years, and it's so nice to be able to walk from my house into the church here and be able to see that beautiful image of Our Lady. And whenever I celebrate Mass, to see that Mary is warmly shining upon me.
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
Especially when the sun shines.
Oh, the 4 o'clock Mass sunshine, you can't beat that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I don't know. How about you all? What do you feel like? Jane?
Oh, it was always when we would have the weddings, of course, the church. It would be right here at the church. And then we just go across the hall to have the wedding reception. And that was really nice. It's a good memory. Mm-hmm. And I guess we all have to be brave and go forward, and it'll be good. Mm. It will be good. So,
Dorothy, do you have any final?
I don't know. This is the only church I've ever known, and it's going to be difficult to get adjusted to another church. And but it'll come with time. And so I just want to be buried from this church because all my family was. I hope it's still here by the time I die. I guess I shouldn't have to live too long so I can share them. So no, it's been a wonderful church to have belonged to. So.
Yeah, you mentioned, especially during these days, when we think about the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, there's this Capuchin church in Rome, which is made of bones. And in the church of the Bones, this is near the Piazza Barberini, and it's a very eerie place to go because it's a chapel made of bones.
Goodness gracious.
And you get to the end of it, and the bones basically are talking to you, and there's this little note there that says, "What you are, we were.
Yeah,
What we are, you will become."
yeah.
And it's
That's
a
true.
very good reminder that the Capuchins and a lot of religious have, which is that someday we're going to take our last breath. And the question we have to ask ourselves is not what address did we worship at, is did we let Jesus Christ save us, rescue us? And this is the time of rescue. When we feel suffering, when we feel isolated, when we feel our weakness, our sinfulness, and we feel the violence of the world overcoming us, this is the time where we need Our Lady of Peace to send her son Jesus to us, to rescue us from the turmoil that's going on in our hearts. And so it's interesting that we started this journey in front of my house with these yellow flowers growing up around St. Francis, and we finish here knowing that God continues to flourish his grace in our hearts through the love of Jesus Christ. And so my prayer, and obviously our thoughts for everybody, is that when we think about the bricks of this building, we think about the history that we just walked through and exploring, we realize that this history is a sign of God's victory in our hearts, in our families, and all those who got to be close to Jesus Christ. Because without Jesus Christ, we finish with death as the last word. But because of Jesus Christ, death is just simply a tunnel into the goal of all life, which is to get to heaven. And so we praise God for the gifts, the blessings, for all the cherished memories and people that were here at Our Lady of Peace. And praise God for you two to be here today,
Thank
to
you.
be able to share that with us. And let's just end with a blessing. The Lord be with you and with your spirit. Almighty God, we just thank you. And we ask you to be with all of us who grieve the loss of peace, to give us her peace in this grief that we can feel. We want our tears to flow with the tear of Jesus on the cross. And we thank you for all those who made this church possible, all the priests, all the nuns, all the great memories, all the people, all the families, all the mothers, the fathers, all the sacraments, everything that went on here. Continue to allow that to just grow and flourish as we walk forward into this merger. And we ask for the blessing of Our Lady of Peace and of Almighty God, in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Amen. Our Lady of Peace, pray for us.
Definitely.